From the Global Newsroom in Toronto, NewsHour with Leslie Roberts.
Domestic violence in this country happens far too often. The number is quite disturbing. Look at this. Every 5 days on average, a woman in this country is killed by her intimate partner. The latest stats are from 2011, but such homicides rose by 19% that year, the third increase in just 4 years. On any given day, almost 3,300 women and more than 3,000 of their children are forced into an emergency shelter to escape domestic violence. But every night, on average, 426 women are turned away, well, because there's no room. And navigating our legal system to get out of an abusive relationship isn't any easier. The financial and emotional costs involved often leave victims feeling helpless. Here's Cindy Palm now with that part of the story.
I was married for 13 years.
And now left with a lifetime of painful memories.
I lived on eggshells all the time, I did everything I can not to get my ex-husband angry.
But he would get angry, ended up abusing the children, too.
I kept hoping that he would change, and he didn't change. It just got worse.
Rose wanted to leave, but didn't have any legal support.
I did not know what step to take. All I knew was that you need a lawyer, you need to go and have to pay a lawyer.
No surprise to this family law lawyer who has seen many abuse victims representing themselves in court.
And they make too much for legal aid, and yet they don't have enough to pay a privately retained lawyer. So they're caught in this catch-22.
It's very difficult to qualify for legal aid. If you have no dependents, children, you'd have to make less than $11,000 to become eligible. $19,000 if you're in a domestic abuse situation. For those with 2 dependents, it's $22,000 or $32,000 for domestic abuse situations.
Given the tragedy that was on the news recently, there are a lot of shelters that have a panel or a referral base of lawyers who deal with the shelters and work with the shelters.
Shelters like this one.
Integral House is the first shelter in Canada for abused women and children. Our staff and volunteers help women with their court visits and setting them up with a lawyer, whether that's in legal aid or whether that's pro bono lawyers.
I found that the best support was at the shelter. And I went to a shelter and stayed there for 6 months. They would check on you. Did you call them? Did you do this? Remind you of what you needed to do. So this way you could be empowering yourself.
Because of the support, she was able to maneuver through the legal system and ended up getting a divorce. Rose now has full custody of her 3 sons. With her dark past behind her, she's looking forward to Christmas and happier memories ahead. Cindy Palm, Global News.
Let's dig deeper now into the problem of domestic violence, because it is a big problem in this country. Penny Krowitz is Executive Director of ACT to End Violence Against Women. Thanks for doing this. We know that in this particular case, the tragedy of the weekend, there is a likely scenario of domestic violence. You've seen this, doing this 30 years. Paint us a picture of what likely unfolded.
This incredibly brave woman did leave the matrimonial home with her children and went to a shelter, has been reported in the newspaper, and reported at that time when she went to the shelter that she had been enduring quite significant violence in her relationship, and she was very frightened and wanted to get away from it. So she was in the shelter and she got help in the shelter. In the interim, she tried to get some legal support around custody of her kids, and that became a huge barrier. From what we read in the newspaper, she left and went into the rental market in the city, rented a private place, and we're assuming now that none of this has been proven, none of it is fact. We're assuming that for some reason, which could range from financial need to him begging her to come back and promising to do it differently, that she did go back to the relationship, and unfortunately, she and the boys were killed. And very often what happens is when a woman does show signs of power, emerging power, re-emerging power, that is the most threatening time in a relationship.
We should say you see this time and time again,
absolutely,
don't you? Yeah.
Absolutely.
This is not a new story.
This is not
a new story. In fact, as I said, you've been doing it 30 years. I've been reporting on it for 20 years. And I want to ask you, what's it going to take to change? And we've been asking that question for 2 decades that I've been only covering it. So shall we focus on what has changed, if anything?
I think we can focus on 2 pieces, what has changed and what we hope is going to change based on recent things that have happened. And what has changed is we definitely have a little bit more awareness. I'm not going to say a lot, but we definitely have a little more awareness about the issue of violence against women.
And you were telling me, for example, the Gomeshi case,
and
the
so,
Crosby case.
Unfortunately, the women that have been affected through the Gomeshi and Crosby incidents have suffered. But because they are both celebrities, the press and the media has all of a sudden sat up and taken notice. I could send 20 press releases to media outlets telling them about things that happen to specific women, but nobody's really taking notice. But when it happens to a celeb, it becomes news. And so now it's in public discourse. Now we see more women coming out and talking about it. We see women coming out. There's a whole new reality about sexual violence on campus, which is something we've been working on for years also, and there's an awareness of that. So we're feeling hopeful that this is becoming not as shameful to talk about.
All right, and it's people like you who are making a difference, and keeping our fingers crossed that that conversation will continue and that the problem will be addressed as is necessary. Thank you, Penny. Appreciate
Thank you very
your time.
much, Leslie.